Imagine waking up to find your most sacred possession vandalized by someone sworn to protect your community. This HOA president thought her wealth made her untouchable until she targeted a Navy veterans memorial to fallen brothers. What happens when a calculated bully picks a fight with a man trained for warfare? Spoiler, that $450,000 fine was just the beginning. Stay locked in. This story of revenge, forged documents, and neighborhood rebellion will leave you fist pumping. $450,000. That's how much my HOA president got fined for spray painting my Navy boat at 2 a.m. like a common criminal. Karen Prescott thought her wealth and power made her untouchable, that she could destroy the one thing honoring my fallen brothers without consequences. This neighborhood tyrant had terrorized residents for years, but she picked the wrong veteran to mess with. When I caught her red-handed vandalizing my most precious possession, I knew this meant war. What happened next completely destroyed her empire and left the entire community shocked. How did one boat bring down the most feared woman in Bayside Cove? Keep watching because this revenge story will blow your mind. Comment below where you're watching from. My name is Nathan Harper, but everyone calls me Nate. I'm 38 years old, a former Navy officer turned freelance Marine engineer. After 12 years serving my country on the high seas, I settled down in Bayside Cove, Florida. But this wasn't just my retirement haven. It became the battlefield where a tyrant tried erasing my brother's legacy. Bayside Cove is a quiet coastal community where retirees sip their morning coffee while watching pelicans dive for breakfast. The houses here are modest, but well-maintained with manicured lawns that would make a golf course jealous. Palm trees line the streets, and there's always a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water from the nearby marina. It's the kind of place where you'd expect to live out your golden years in peace, watching sunsets paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The crown jewel of my property sits at the small dock behind my house, a 1972 Navy patrol boat that I bought at a government surplus auction 3 years ago. She's not much to look at, I'll admit. The hull shows her age with patches of rust and faded gray paint. That rusted 1972 patrol boat? To Karen, an eyesore. To me, it's the last place I heard Tommy laugh before the storm swallowed him. This boat is identical to the one I served on during my final deployment, where I lost 2 good friends in a storm off the coast of Somalia. Every scratch on her hull whispers a story, especially the ones from the night waves tore 2 souls from this world. Every morning, I sit on her deck with my coffee, running my fingers along the weathered controls, remembering Tommy and Marcus. The boat isn't just a piece of metal. She's a memorial, sanctuary, and the only thing that keeps their memory alive in my daily routine. The local marina offered me $20,000 for her once, but I'd rather sell my own kidney. That's when Karen Prescott entered my life like a hurricane in a designer pantsuit. While I was scrubbing oil spills in the Persian Gulf, Karen was redecorating her 3rd guest bathroom. Now she wanted to sanitize my history like it was another HOA violation. Karen is 52 years old, the self-appointed queen of Bayside Cove's Homeowners Association, and a woman who treats neighborhood regulations like they're the 10 Commandments carved in stone. She lives in the largest house in our community, a 3-story Mediterranean-style mansion with more square footage than some shopping malls. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair never moves, even in hurricane-force winds, and she has this way of looking at you like you're something unpleasant she stepped in. Karen inherited a fortune when her parents died, retired early from her banking job, and apparently decided that her life's mission was to make everyone else's existence as regulated and joyless as possible. The first shot fired in our war came in the form of an official HOA notice delivered to my mailbox on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. The letter was typed on expensive letterhead with Karen's signature flourishing across the bottom like she was signing the Declaration of Independence. Dear Mr. Harper, it began, "It has come to the attention of the Bayside Cove Homeowners Association that you are harboring an eyesore on your property that violates our community aesthetic standards. The rusted vessel behind your residence must be removed within 30 days, or you will face escalating fines and potential legal action. I read that letter 3 times, my coffee growing cold in my hands before the absurdity of it really sank in. My boat was parked legally on my own property behind my house, causing exactly zero problems for anyone except Karen's delicate sensibilities. I decided to handle this like a reasonable adult. I knocked on Karen's front door that same afternoon, wearing my best polo shirt and a diplomatic smile. When she answered, flanked by her 2 perfectly groomed poodles, I explained that my boat was legally parked, properly registered, and held deep personal significance. I even offered to install some decorative screening if she was concerned about the view from her bedroom window. Karen listened to my entire explanation with the kind of patient smile you'd give a toddler who just announced they were going to be a dinosaur when they grew up. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm sure your little tugboat has sentimental value, but this is a respectable neighborhood. We have standards. That piece of junk is bringing down everyone's property values, and it needs to go." The way she said tugboat made my jaw clench, but I kept my composure and told her I wouldn't be moving my boat. That's when Karen declared war. 2 weeks later, I woke up to what looked like a crime scene behind my house. Someone had spray painted bright red graffiti all over my boat's hull with the word junk written in letters 3 feet tall across the starboard side. The navigation lights I'd carefully restored were smashed to pieces, their glass scattered across the dock like glittering confetti. Someone had taken a crowbar to the hull, leaving dents and scratches that would cost thousands to repair. The waterproof coating I'd applied just last month was scraped off in long, deliberate gouges that exposed the bare metal underneath. The damage was so extensive and personal that it felt like someone had vandalized a grave. Coffee slipped from my hands, shattered, just like she'd shattered the navigation lights Tommy installed. For 12 years, I'd carried ghosts. Now, I'd carry a war. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All I could see was Tommy's face the last time I saw him alive, laughing as he polished the brass fittings on our boat's controls. The memory hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grab onto the dock railing to steady myself. This wasn't just property damage. This was desecration. Whoever did this had violated something sacred, and they were going to pay for it. As I surveyed the damage, I immediately started documenting everything with my phone camera. I took photos from every angle, capturing the precision of destruction and the expensive equipment that would need to be replaced. But what caught my attention was something glinting in the morning sunlight near the boat's stern, a pair of expensive leather gloves, the kind with designer stitching that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. But in the glittering debris, I found her fatal mistake, a $300 pair of gloves still dripping with red paint, and her initials stitched inside. They were covered in red paint and had been dropped carelessly beside my boat, as if the vandal had been in too much of a hurry to notice. I carefully photographed them in place before picking them up with a plastic bag, already knowing whose manicured hands they would fit perfectly. That evening, I sent Karen a detailed email with photo attachments requesting $8,500 in compensation for the repairs and including close-up pictures of the designer gloves I'd found at the scene. Her response came back within an hour, and the tone was completely different from her usual condescending politeness. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she wrote, but I could practically feel the panic through the screen. "Perhaps you should invest in better security for your junk pile instead of making wild accusations against respected members of this community." The message was clear. She knew I knew, but she was betting I couldn't prove it. The next morning brought both vindication and complications. My neighbor, Hector Alvarez, knocked on my door at 7 a.m., practically bouncing with excitement. "Nate, you've got to see this," he said, leading me to his garage where his security system monitor displayed crystal clear footage from the night of the vandalism. There, captured in high-definition digital glory, was Karen Prescott herself, dressed in black clothing and moving around my boat like some kind of suburban ninja. The timestamp showed 2:15 a.m., and the footage clearly showed her spray painting my boat, smashing the navigation lights with a crowbar, and dropping those expensive gloves in her haste to escape. "I've been waiting years for something like this," Hector grinned, saving the footage to multiple backup drives. "That woman has made life miserable for half the neighborhood, and now we've got her dead to rights." But Karen wasn't done escalating our conflict. 3 days after I'd sent her the email about the gloves, I received another official HOA notice demanding a $500 fine for violation of community standards and failure to maintain property in accordance with established guidelines. This time, she'd cited a completely different section of the HOA bylaws, one that gave the association authority to penalize residents for anything deemed detrimental to neighborhood harmony. The language was so vague it could have been used to fine someone for having the wrong color mailbox or planting flowers that bloomed at the wrong time of year. Karen was using the HOA rulebook like a weapon, finding new ways to attack me legally while pretending her vandalism had never happened. The real bombshell arrived by certified mail the following week. A property survey that claimed the land where my boat was docked didn't actually belong to me. According to this official-looking document, my property line ended 15 feet before the water line, meaning my boat was parked on community property without permission. The survey was signed by something called Precision Property Solutions and looked legitimate enough to fool most people. But when I compared it to my original deed and the survey I'd received when I bought the house, the differences were obvious. Someone had taken my actual property boundaries and simply moved them inland, stealing 15 feet of waterfront that legally belonged to me. The forgery was sophisticated, but it was still a forgery. I immediately contacted Samantha Torres, a 29-year-old legal aide who worked for the city planning department. Sam had attended several HOA meetings where Karen had publicly humiliated residents over minor infractions, and she developed a personal grudge against our neighborhood dictator. When I showed her both the legitimate and fraudulent surveys, her eyes lit up with the intensity of a prosecutor who just found the smoking gun. "This is completely illegal," she said, spreading both documents across her desk and pointing out the subtle but unmistakable alterations. "Whoever created this fake survey has committed multiple felonies: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and probably several others. The question is, can we prove Karen was behind it?" Sam agreed to help me research Karen's background and look for patterns of similar behavior. Meanwhile, Karen launched what she called a neighborhood beautification campaign, going door to door with a petition demanding that I remove my unsightly vessel from what she now claimed was community property. Her pitch was masterful. She told each neighbor that my boat was lowering their home values by thousands of dollars and that my refusal to cooperate showed complete disregard for community standards. Several residents signed immediately, either because they genuinely believed her lies or because they were terrified of becoming her next target. Karen had spent years building a reputation as someone who could make life miserable for anyone who crossed her, and that reputation was working in her favor. People were more afraid of her retaliation than they were interested in the truth. The psychological pressure was becoming unbearable. Neighbors who used to wave when I walked by now crossed the street to avoid me, and I could feel their disapproval like a physical weight on my shoulders. My evening walks through the neighborhood became exercises in social isolation, with conversations stopping abruptly when I approached and resuming in whispers after I passed. Even worse, my business started suffering. Two potential clients canceled their contracts after researching my background and discovering my ongoing dispute with the HOA. Karen's campaign was systematically destroying both my reputation and my livelihood, all while maintaining complete plausible deniability about her role in the vandalism. But Karen made a crucial mistake during what she thought was a private conversation outside the community center. I was picking up my mail when I saw her talking intensely with a man in an expensive suit. Their body language suggested they were discussing something they didn't want overheard. When Karen noticed me watching, she immediately ended the conversation and hurried away, but not before I managed to take a discreet photo with my phone. The man looked familiar, And later that evening, I realized why. He was the same person whose signature appeared on the fraudulent property survey. Karen had been sloppy enough to meet with her co-conspirator in public, giving me photographic evidence of their connection. That night, I spent hours digging through public records, HOA meeting minutes, and neighborhood gossip, looking for any pattern of questionable behavior in Karen's past. What I found was a treasure trove of complaints, warnings, and red flags that painted a picture of systematic abuse of power. Three previous HOA board members had resigned in protest over Karen's autocratic management style, and there were documented instances of residents being fined for violations that existed only in Karen's imagination. One particularly damning email thread showed Karen arguing with the association's accountant about reimbursements for expenses that clearly had nothing to do with community maintenance. She'd been warned twice about financial irregularities, but had somehow managed to maintain her position as president despite multiple formal complaints. The pieces were starting to come together, and I realized that Karen's attack on my boat was just the latest chapter in a long history of neighborhood tyranny. She'd been getting away with increasingly brazen power grabs because no one had ever challenged her systematically or gathered comprehensive evidence of her misconduct. But now she was facing someone with military training, strategic planning, and the patience to build an airtight case. Karen thought she was dealing with just another intimidated homeowner, but she was about to discover that she'd picked the wrong enemy. I had video evidence of her vandalizing my boat, proof of her document forgery, and a growing file of her other crimes. The war she'd started was about to turn in my favor. Armed with Hector's security footage and evidence of Karen's fraudulent property survey, I decided it was time to go on the offensive. I spent an entire weekend preparing a comprehensive presentation that documented every questionable decision Karen had made as HOA president over the past 3 years. The evidence was damning: unauthorized expenditures, conflicts of interest, fraudulent documents, and a clear pattern of harassment directed at residents who dared to question her authority. I uploaded the entire presentation to our neighborhood's online community forum at exactly 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, timing it for when most residents would be checking their phones over coffee. The post was titled "The Truth About Your HOA President," video evidence inside, and it included Hector's crystal clear footage of Karen vandalizing my boat. The response was immediate and explosive. Within hours, my post had generated dozens of comments from neighbors sharing their own stories of Karen's abuse of power. Margaret Chin described how Karen had fined her $300 for planting roses that were supposedly the wrong shade of pink, even though they were identical to flowers in Karen's own garden. Robert Williams revealed that he'd been forced to repaint his entire house because Karen claimed the original color violated community standards, despite the fact that it matched several other homes in the neighborhood. Most shocking of all, elderly Walter Grayson came forward with documentation showing that Karen had been systematically targeting residents she disliked with frivolous fines and harassment campaigns designed to force them to sell their homes and leave the community. The video evidence of Karen spray painting my boat had given other victims the courage to speak out about years of abuse. Karen's retaliation was swift and vicious. Instead of addressing the allegations against her or acknowledging the video evidence, she doubled down on her attacks against me. She filed formal complaints with the county zoning board, claiming I was operating an illegal marina on residential property. She contacted the Coast Guard to report that my vessel was improperly moored and potentially dangerous to navigation. Most devastatingly, she somehow convinced a county inspector to issue an environmental violation notice claiming my boat was leaking fuel into the water, which would require expensive remediation and could result in massive federal fines. The inspector's report was obviously fraudulent. My boat hadn't been fueled in months, and there was no evidence of contamination, but it would take weeks of bureaucratic fighting to get the violation dismissed. The fake environmental violation was Karen's masterstroke because it gave her legal grounds to demand immediate action. She filed an emergency injunction requesting that my boat be impounded pending environmental assessment, arguing that every day it remained in the water posed a threat to marine life and water quality. The injunction hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, giving me less than a week to mount a defense against charges that could result in the permanent confiscation of my most precious possession. Karen had maneuvered me into a corner where I was fighting for my boat's survival on multiple fronts simultaneously, and she clearly expected the pressure to break my resolve. But Karen had underestimated both my determination and growing network of allies. Sam Torres worked overtime researching legal precedents for environmental violations, discovering that the inspector who'd cited my boat had a history of filing false reports in exchange for under-the-table payments. More importantly, she found evidence that the same inspector had received payments from Karen's husband's construction company for favorable reports on building projects that should have failed inspection. Meanwhile, Hector began canvassing the neighborhood with his own camera, documenting the actual condition of my boat and interviewing neighbors who were willing to testify that there had never been any fuel smell or visible contamination in the water around my dock. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tyler Prescott, Karen's 19-year-old nephew, had been acting increasingly nervous and agitated since the night of the vandalism. I'd noticed him hanging around the marina at odd hours, always looking over his shoulder like he expected to be arrested at any moment. When Walter mentioned seeing Tyler near my boat on the night Karen attacked, I realized he might have been her accomplice. Tyler was the right age and build to have helped carry tools or acted as a lookout, and his guilty behavior suggested he was carrying a heavy conscience about something significant. I decided to approach Tyler directly, but carefully. I waited until I saw him alone at the marina's bait shop and struck up what seemed like casual conversation. "Hey, Tyler," I said, keeping my voice friendly and non-threatening. "How's college going?" His reaction was immediate and telling. He went pale, started stammering about being busy, and couldn't maintain eye contact for more than a few seconds. When I casually mentioned that someone had vandalized my boat and asked if he'd noticed anything unusual that night, Tyler practically jumped out of his skin. "I don't know anything about your boat," he said, backing toward the door. I wasn't even there that night. The problem was, I hadn't mentioned which night the vandalism had occurred, and his denial was far too specific and panicked for someone who was truly innocent. Tyler's nervous reaction told me everything I needed to know, but I needed more concrete evidence to connect him to Karen's crime. That evening, I returned to the marina with a metal detector and spent 2 hours searching the area around my dock. My patience was rewarded when I found something buried in the sandy soil beneath the wooden planks, a small flashlight with K. Prescott engraved on the side. Obviously a personalized gift that Karen had dropped during her midnight vandalism spree. The flashlight was covered in the same red paint that had been used on my boat, providing a direct link between Karen and the crime scene. Combined with Hector's video footage and the designer gloves, I now had overwhelming physical evidence of Karen's guilt. But the most damaging evidence came from Tyler himself. The psychological pressure of keeping Karen's secret had been eating away at him for weeks, and when I showed him the engraved flashlight, he completely broke down. Through tears and stammering confessions, he revealed that Karen had forced him to act as her lookout while she vandalized my boat, threatening to have him arrested as the sole perpetrator if he ever told anyone the truth. She promised to pay his college tuition in exchange for his silence, but also made it clear that she would destroy his entire family if he betrayed her. Tyler had been living in terror for weeks, knowing that Karen was capable of ruining lives and that he was completely at her mercy. Armed with Tyler's confession, Hector's video evidence, and the physical proof linking Karen to the crime scene, Sam and I requested an emergency hearing to present our findings before Karen's injunction could be approved. We had less than 48 hours to prepare a comprehensive defense that would not only save my boat, but also expose Karen's pattern of fraud and harassment. The case was evolving beyond a simple neighborhood dispute. It was becoming a test of whether wealthy bullies could use the legal system to destroy their neighbors with complete impunity. As I sat in my boat that night, looking out at the peaceful water and thinking about Tommy and Marcus, I knew that tomorrow's hearing would determine not just the fate of my memorial to them, but the future of our entire community's freedom from Karen's tyranny. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m., but Karen had prepared one final surprise attack. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with angry messages from clients and colleagues throughout the marine industry. Someone had posted detailed accusations on multiple boating forums and professional networks claiming that I was operating illegally as a marine contractor without proper licenses and insurance. The posts included what appeared to be official documentation showing that my business permits had been revoked due to safety violations and fraudulent practices. According to these fabricated documents, I'd been banned from working on boats in 3 different counties and was currently under investigation by the state licensing board for allegedly endangering public safety through incompetent work. The fake scandal had been strategically timed and expertly distributed across every platform where marine professionals might see it. My phone rang constantly with clients demanding explanations, existing contracts being canceled, and potential customers withdrawing their interest in my services. The most devastating call came from Peterson Marine, a major yacht manufacturer that had been planning to hire me for a $50,000 restoration project on a vintage racing yacht. We can't risk our company's reputation by associating with someone under investigation, their project manager explained apologetically. I'm sure you understand our position. I understood perfectly. Karen had found a way to attack my livelihood directly, knowing that financial pressure would be more effective than legal threats in forcing me to surrender. The forged documents were sophisticated enough to fool anyone who wasn't familiar with the specific details of marine contractor licensing. Someone had taken legitimate forms from the state licensing board and filled them out with false information about my business, creating an alternate reality where I was an incompetent criminal instead of a respected professional. The forger had even gone so far as to create fake case numbers and reference real licensing officials, making the documents appear authentic to casual observers. This level of document fraud required either significant expertise in forgery or access to official templates and letterhead, resources that seemed unlikely for a suburban HOA president acting alone, but entirely possible for someone with enough money to hire professional criminals. As I drove to the courthouse that morning, my phone continued buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from my business partner, clients, and industry contacts. The fabricated scandal was spreading faster than I could respond to individual inquiries, and each new message felt like another nail in the coffin of my professional reputation. I'd spent 15 years building credibility in the marine industry, and Karen had destroyed it in a single morning using nothing but lies, forgeries, and social media manipulation. Even if I won the legal battle over my boat, I might lose everything else that mattered to my ability to make a living and support myself. The courthouse hearing was surreal. Karen arrived dressed like she was attending a charity gala, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She'd brought a new attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who radiated the kind of confidence that comes from winning cases through intimidation rather than evidence. Karen's legal team had prepared a multimedia presentation complete with enlarged photographs of my boat, environmental impact studies, and testimony from concerned residents who claimed to fear for their safety and property values. They painted me as a reckless individual who was endangering the entire community by harboring a derelict vessel that posed environmental and navigational hazards to everyone in Bayside Cove. My defense was built on facts rather than fear-mongering. Sam presented Hector's video footage showing Karen vandalizing my boat, Tyler's sworn confession about his role as her accomplice, and the physical evidence linking her directly to the crime scene. We had photographs of the engraved flashlight and designer gloves found at the scene, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen Karen acting suspiciously that night, and documentation proving that there had never been any environmental contamination around my boat. Most importantly, we had evidence that the inspector who'd filed the environmental violation had been paid by Karen's husband's construction company for favorable reports on projects that should have failed inspection, establishing a clear pattern of corruption. The judge was a stern-faced woman in her 60s who'd clearly dealt with plenty of frivolous lawsuits over the years. She listened patiently to both sides before asking pointed questions that cut through the legal rhetoric to focus on actual evidence. When Karen's attorney tried to argue that my boat posed an immediate environmental threat, the judge asked for specific documentation of contamination, which of course didn't exist beyond the fraudulent inspector's report. When they claimed my vessel was improperly moored, the judge requested copies of relevant maritime regulations, which clearly showed my boat was in full compliance with all applicable laws. Most damaging to Karen's case, when pressed for evidence supporting their claims about my professional licenses being revoked, her attorney had to admit they were relying on anonymous reports rather than official documentation from licensing authorities. The hearing took a dramatic turn when the judge announced she'd received additional evidence that morning, a sworn affidavit from Tyler Prescott providing detailed testimony about Karen's criminal activities. Tyler's statement described not only how Karen had vandalized my boat while forcing him to act as her lookout, but also revealed a broader pattern of harassment and intimidation directed at multiple residents throughout the community. His confession included specific dates, times, and methods of attacks that Karen had ordered him to carry out against neighbors who had opposed her policies or questioned her authority. The affidavit painted a picture of Karen as the mastermind of a systematic campaign of terrorism designed to maintain her control over Bayside Cove through fear and intimidation. Tyler's testimony was devastating to Karen's credibility, but her response was even more damaging to her case. Instead of showing remorse or accepting responsibility for her actions, she launched into a furious tirade about how Tyler was an ungrateful little liar who was making up stories to save his own skin from prosecution. She accused him of acting without her knowledge or permission, then immediately contradicted herself by claiming that my boat deserved to be vandalized because it was an eyesore that was ruining the neighborhood's property values. Her outburst revealed the ugly truth behind her carefully constructed facade of concerned community leadership. She was a vindictive bully who felt entitled to destroy other people's property if it served her personal agenda. The judge didn't blink at Karen's tears. Not when I played footage of her swinging that crowbar like it was a golf club at the country club. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. She dismissed all of Karen's claims against my boat, finding no evidence of environmental contamination, safety violations, or improper mooring. She ordered Karen to pay full restitution for the damage to my boat, plus legal fees and court costs. More significantly, she referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to the vandalism, fraudulent documents, false environmental reports, and conspiracy to commit multiple crimes. Karen left the courthouse in stunned silence, no longer the confident neighborhood queen who had arrived that morning expecting an easy victory over what she'd assumed was just another intimidated resident. But my legal victory felt hollow as I checked my phone and discovered dozens of new messages from clients and colleagues who'd heard about the fabricated licensing scandal. Even though I had proven Karen's environmental claims were false in court, the damage to my professional reputation would take months or years to repair. Karen had lost this particular battle, but she'd successfully poisoned my ability to make a living in the marine industry. As I drove home from the courthouse, I realized that winning in court was only the first step in a much longer war. Karen had demonstrated that she was willing to destroy innocent people's lives to maintain her power, and she probably had other weapons in her arsenal that I hadn't discovered yet. The real question was whether I had the strength and resources to survive whatever she would try next. The weeks following the court hearing were a bizarre mixture of victory and ongoing torment. While I had successfully defended my boat and exposed Karen's role in the vandalism, my professional reputation remained in shambles. The fake licensing scandal had spread so widely throughout the marine industry that potential clients were still calling to verify whether the accusations were true, even after local news outlets reported on Karen's court defeat. I spent countless hours on the phone with industry contacts, boat owners, and licensing officials explaining the situation and providing documentation to prove my credentials were completely legitimate. It was exhausting work that generated no income while leaving me feeling like I was trying to bail out a sinking ship with nothing but a teaspoon. Karen had retreated from public view after her courtroom humiliation, canceling scheduled HOA meetings and avoiding her usual neighborhood power walks. But her absence didn't mean she'd given up. If anything, it suggested she was planning something bigger and more devastating than her previous attempts to destroy me. Through the neighborhood grapevine, I learned that she'd hired a private investigator to dig into my background, apparently hoping to find some scandal or mistake from my past that she could use as ammunition. She'd also contacted several of my former Navy colleagues, fishing for anyone willing to say negative things about my military service or character. The woman was absolutely relentless in her pursuit of weapons to use against anyone who dared to challenge her authority or expose her crimes. What I found in Walter's folder would make a mob boss blush. My breakthrough came from the most unexpected source imaginable. Walter Grayson, a 70-year-old retiree who lived 2 blocks away and was known mainly for his collection of stray cats, knocked on my door one evening carrying a manila folder thick with documents. "I've been saving these for the right moment," he said with the satisfied expression of someone about to reveal a long-kept secret. Karen thinks she's been clever about hiding her financial shenanigans, but she made one crucial mistake. She underestimated a retired accountant who has nothing better to do than keep detailed records of everything that happens in this neighborhood. Walter spread his documents across my kitchen table, revealing a pattern of embezzlement and fraud that had been going on for nearly 5 years. The evidence Walter had collected was staggering in both its scope and audacity. Karen had been systematically stealing from the HOA's maintenance fund, using association credit cards to pay for personal expenses like spa treatments, designer clothing, luxury vacations, and even her weekly tennis lessons at the country club. She'd authorized emergency repairs to community property that were actually improvements to her own home, billing the association for landscaping work, pool maintenance, and even a completely new roof that had been installed exclusively on her mansion. Most brazen of all, she'd been paying herself an unauthorized salary as HOA president, writing monthly checks for administrative services that were never approved by the board or disclosed to residents in any official capacity. Walter's meticulous documentation showed that Karen had stolen over $200,000 from the community fund over the past 5 years, money that should have been used for legitimate maintenance, landscaping, and infrastructure improvements throughout Bayside Cove. Instead of fixing the community's aging water system or repaving the increasingly dangerous potholes in our roads, Karen had been treating the HOA treasury as her personal bank account. The evidence included credit card statements, canceled checks, receipts, and bank records that clearly demonstrated the fraudulent nature of her expenditures. Most damning of all, Walter had copies of board meeting minutes where Karen had specifically voted against hiring an independent auditor to review the association's finances, a decision that now made perfect sense given what she'd been desperately trying to hide. But Walter's real smoking gun was a series of email exchanges between Karen and Tyler that he'd obtained through his careful monitoring of the neighborhood's digital communications. In these messages, Karen explicitly discussed her plans to vandalize my boat, providing detailed instructions about which tools to use and how to cause maximum psychological damage without being caught by security cameras. She'd planned the entire attack like a military operation, scouting my property for weeks and timing the vandalism for when she thought no one would be watching. The emails also revealed that Karen had been planning similar attacks against other residents who'd opposed her policies, making Tyler her personal enforcer in a broader campaign of intimidation and property destruction designed to maintain her absolute control over the community. But Karen's fatal flaw wasn't greed. It was underestimating a 70-year-old man with a cat army and a vendetta. Armed with Walter's explosive evidence, Sam Torres and I arranged an urgent meeting with Detective Rodriguez, the police investigator who'd been assigned to look into my vandalism case. Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran who specialized in white-collar crime, and she immediately recognized the significance of Walter's documentation. This isn't just neighborhood drama anymore, she explained while carefully photographing each piece of evidence for the official case file. We're looking at felony embezzlement, conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and organized criminal activity. The district attorney is going to absolutely love this case. It's got everything. Rodriguez assured us that Karen would be arrested within the week once the Financial Crimes Unit finished verifying Walter's evidence and obtaining the necessary search warrants for Karen's home and business records. The irony wasn't lost on me that Karen's ultimate downfall would come not from her direct attack on my boat, but from her own insatiable greed and arrogance. She'd been so focused on destroying me that she'd failed to notice the methodical documentation of her crimes by a neighbor she'd dismissed as a harmless old man with too much time on his hands. Walter's patience and attention to detail had created an absolutely airtight case that would send Karen to prison for years and force her to repay every penny she'd stolen from the community she'd claimed to serve. The woman who tried to destroy my life over a boat was about to lose everything because she couldn't resist stealing from her own neighbors while attacking anyone who might expose her corruption. As we prepared for Karen's inevitable arrest, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months ago, I'd been a quiet marine engineer, living peacefully with my memorial boat, bothering absolutely no one and asking only to be left alone with my memories of fallen friends. Karen's unprovoked attack had forced me into a war I never wanted to fight. But in defending myself, I'd uncovered a criminal enterprise that had been systematically victimizing every resident in our community for years. My boat, the memorial to Tommy and Marcus that Karen had tried to destroy, had become the catalyst for exposing corruption that affected dozens of innocent families who'd been suffering in silence under her reign of terror. The morning of Karen's arrest, I sat on my boat's deck with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. Tommy and Marcus would have appreciated the poetic justice of the situation. Their memorial had become the instrument of bringing a different kind of enemy to justice. Karen had thought she could intimidate me into submission through vandalism and harassment, but she'd catastrophically underestimated the determination of someone who'd been trained by the United States Navy to never surrender in the face of adversity. Today, she would finally learn that actions have consequences and that even wealthy bullies with political connections aren't above the law when their crimes are exposed to the harsh light of justice. Karen's arrest happened on a Tuesday morning while she was having her weekly tennis lesson at the exclusive Bayside Country Club. Detective Rodriguez and her team had deliberately waited until Karen was in the most public place possible, surrounded by her wealthy friends and social circle, before serving the arrest warrant. According to Walter, who heard about it from his friend who worked in the club's pro shop, Karen's reaction was absolutely spectacular. She screamed that there had been some terrible mistake, demanded to speak to the mayor immediately, and tried to call her attorney while being handcuffed in front of the entire tennis league. The image of Bayside Cove's self-appointed queen being led away in handcuffs by uniformed police officers spread through the community faster than gossip at a church bake sale, and everyone wanted to hear the details. But the real drama was just beginning to unfold. Within hours of Karen's arrest, Tyler Prescott appeared at my front door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and his hands were visibly shaking as he asked if he could come inside to talk. I'd been expecting this conversation ever since his confession to the police about Karen's vandalism, but I wasn't prepared for the shocking revelations he was about to share. Mr. Harper, he said, collapsing into my living room chair like his legs couldn't support him anymore. You don't know the whole truth about what my aunt made me do over the past 2 years. The boat thing was just the tip of the iceberg. Tyler's confession was like listening to someone describe a nightmare that had consumed his entire life. Karen hadn't just convinced him to help with vandalizing my boat. She'd been using him as her personal crime enforcer for multiple attacks against neighbors who dared to cross her over the years. He'd slashed tires, broken windows, stolen mail, planted fake evidence to make residents look like they were violating HOA regulations, and even spread malicious rumors designed to destroy people's reputations and friendships. Tyler had been Karen's secret weapon in her systematic campaign to terrorize the neighborhood into absolute submission, and the psychological weight of all those crimes was literally eating him alive from the inside out. The scope of Karen's criminal enterprise was absolutely staggering. Tyler described a carefully orchestrated campaign of harassment that had targeted anyone who questioned Karen's authority or challenged her increasingly dictatorial decisions. When the Henderson family complained about excessive HOA fees, Tyler had broken their garden sprinklers and poured paint stripper on their car. When Maria Santos ran for the HOA board on a platform of financial transparency, Tyler had dumped garbage on her lawn and spray painted obscenities on her mailbox. Every mysterious act of vandalism or property damage that had occurred in Bayside Cove over the past 2 years could be traced directly back to Karen's orders and Tyler's reluctant but terrified compliance with her demands. But Tyler's most shocking revelation was that Karen had been planning to escalate her attacks far beyond simple property damage and harassment. She'd actually asked him to plant drugs in my truck, hoping to get me arrested and discredited as a drug dealer in the eyes of the community and potential clients. When that plan seemed too risky and likely to backfire, she'd seriously considered having him start a fire in my boat's engine compartment, which would have made her claims about environmental hazards into a horrifying, self-fulfilling prophecy. Tyler had refused both suggestions, but Karen had threatened to destroy his entire family financially if he didn't follow through with increasingly dangerous and potentially deadly assignments that could have resulted in serious injuries or deaths. Tyler explained that Karen's hold over him wasn't just psychological, it was financial. She owns my parents' mortgage, he said, his face pale with genuine terror. She bought it from the bank when my dad lost his job last year, and she made it clear she could call in the entire loan anytime she wanted and make my whole family homeless. My little sister is only 14, and the thought of her living on the streets because of something I did or didn't do for Karen was too much to handle. I felt completely trapped with no way out that wouldn't hurt innocent people I love. Karen had systematically identified the financial vulnerabilities of families throughout the community and used those weaknesses as leverage to force compliance with her increasingly criminal demands. Tyler's decision to finally confess hadn't been motivated purely by guilt, though that was certainly part of it. He discovered through overheard phone conversations that Karen was planning to throw him under the bus completely, blaming him for all of her crimes while portraying herself as an innocent victim of her nephew's supposedly independent criminal behavior. She'd intended to claim that Tyler had been stealing HOA funds to finance his own vandalism spree while she remained completely oblivious to his activities. Karen was fully prepared to send her own nephew to prison for decades in order to save herself from the consequences of the criminal empire she'd built and operated for years. Armed with Tyler's detailed confession and insider knowledge of Karen's operations, Detective Rodriguez was able to build a comprehensive case that went far beyond simple embezzlement and vandalism. The charges now included conspiracy, racketeering, witness intimidation, extortion, organized criminal activity, and multiple counts of fraud, felonies that carried potential sentences measured in decades rather than years. Tyler's cooperation had transformed what started as a neighborhood dispute over a boat into a major criminal case that would send shockwaves through Florida's legal system and HOA governance throughout the entire state. The community's reaction to these revelations was an explosive mixture of shock, outrage, and vindication. Neighbors who'd suffered mysterious property damage and harassment over the years finally understood what had actually happened to them. And those who had initially supported Karen's crusade against my boat were horrified to learn they'd been unknowing enablers of a systematic criminal conspiracy. The online neighborhood forum erupted with stories from Karen's victims, sharing their experiences and expressing amazement that one person could have caused so much suffering and division while maintaining such a convincing facade of respectability and community concern. Perhaps the most satisfying moment in this entire ordeal came when Karen's husband quietly filed for divorce and moved out of their mansion, taking the two perfectly groomed poodles with him. According to neighborhood gossip, he'd been completely unaware of his wife's extensive criminal activities and was devastated to learn that their luxury lifestyle had been financed entirely by money stolen from their own neighbors. The man who'd been married to Bayside Cove's self-proclaimed queen for 23 years suddenly discovered that he'd been living with a complete stranger who was capable of remarkable cruelty, manipulation, and deception. As Tyler finished his confession, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and genuine pity. Satisfaction because justice was finally being served in a comprehensive way, but pity for a young man who'd been systematically manipulated and threatened by someone who should have been protecting and guiding him instead of using him as a weapon against innocent people. Tyler would still face legal consequences for his actions, but he'd also been one of Karen's victims in his own way, trapped by circumstances beyond his control and threatened with consequences that would have hurt his entire family. His courage in finally coming forward had made it possible to expose the full extent of Karen's crimes and ensure that she would never be able to hurt anyone else in our community again. Would a forged survey hold up? Could a veteran outmaneuver a sociopath with a clipboard? Stick around. The answer costs $450,000. The final court hearing was everything I'd hoped for and more. Karen appeared in the defendant's dock wearing an Orange County Jail jumpsuit instead of her usual designer outfits, her once perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The judge read through the charges with gravity: embezzlement in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, witness intimidation, organized criminal activity, and multiple counts of property destruction. Karen's defense attorney could only argue for leniency based on her supposed lack of prior convictions and alleged cooperation with the investigation. The prosecution's case was devastating. Detective Rodriguez testified about Karen's systematic criminal enterprise operating under the cover of HOA business for nearly 5 years. Tyler took the stand and calmly detailed his role as Karen's reluctant enforcer, describing each act of vandalism and intimidation he'd carried out under her threats. Walter Grayson presented his meticulous financial documentation, walking the court through 5 years of embezzlement with charts and bank records that made Karen's theft impossible to deny. The most powerful testimony came from Karen's victims, neighbors who'd suffered years of harassment without understanding who was responsible. Maria Santos described finding her car vandalized after announcing her intention to run for the HOA board. The Henderson family testified about mysterious property damage that had cost them thousands of dollars. One by one, Karen's victims told their stories, painting a picture of a peaceful neighborhood systematically terrorized by someone who was supposed to be protecting community interests. When it came time for sentencing, the judge's words were firm and condemning. "Mrs. Prescott," he said, looking directly at Karen, "you have systematically abused a position of trust to enrich yourself at your neighbor's expense while terrorizing anyone who questioned your methods. You have corrupted a young man who trusted you and destroyed the peace of an entire community. This court sentences you to 8 years in state prison followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution in the amount of $450,000. The financial breakdown was staggering: $8,500 for damage to my boat, $200,000 stolen from the HOA treasury over 5 years, $150,000 in property damage to neighbors' homes and vehicles, and $91,500 in legal fees and penalties. Karen's criminal enterprise had cost our community nearly $500,000 in direct damages, not counting the psychological trauma that would take years to heal. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, I felt complex emotions. Relief that this nightmare was over and justice had been served, satisfaction that Karen would spend years behind bars, but also sadness that it had taken so much pain and destruction to reach this resolution. Karen's victims had suffered in silence for years, and Tyler's life had been derailed by an adult who should have been guiding him toward better choices. The aftermath brought unexpected changes to Bayside Cove. The HOA was restructured with new leadership and transparent financial oversight. Sam Torres was elected as our new president, bringing her legal expertise and commitment to fairness. The community came together in ways that hadn't been possible during Karen's reign of terror that had divided neighbors and created an atmosphere of fear throughout our once peaceful neighborhood. My boat became a local landmark after trial coverage appeared in regional newspapers. Children would walk by with their parents and ask about the famous boat that helped expose the corrupt HOA president. I started giving informal tours to neighbors curious about naval history, sharing stories about my military service and the friends I'd lost. The vessel Karen had tried to destroy as an eyesore became a source of community pride and education. Tommy and Marcus would have been proud knowing their memorial was bringing people together and teaching young people about military sacrifice. In the Navy, we never leave a man behind. Turns out that applies to rusty boats and neighborhoods held hostage by a dictator in Lilly Pulitzer. The financial settlement allowed me to completely restore my boat to better condition than when I'd first bought her. I replaced all damaged equipment, upgraded navigation systems, and added safety features while maintaining her classic military appearance. The insurance settlement for my damaged business reputation covered all income I'd lost during Karen's harassment campaign, plus compensation for stress and professional damage. 6 months after Karen began serving her sentence, I organized a community barbecue on my restored boat to celebrate the return of peace to Bayside Cove. Neighbors who'd been afraid to speak during Karen's oppressive reign gathered on my deck, sharing food and stories while watching Florida sunsets paint the sky in brilliant colors. Hector brought his legendary grilled fish. Walter entertained everyone with stories from his accounting days. Sam gave a moving speech about standing up to bullies and corruption. Tyler attended with his parents, and his personal apology to everyone he'd wronged was emotionally powerful. He'd received community service and probation, but more importantly, he'd learned lessons about integrity and protecting innocent people. His family's mortgage had been transferred to a legitimate bank, freeing them from Karen's manipulation and allowing Tyler to return to college with renewed purpose. The most satisfying moment came when Mrs. Henderson raised her glass in a toast. To Nate's boat, she said, her voice carrying across the water, and to the man who refused to let a bully destroy something precious. You showed us that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's easier to give up. The applause that followed felt like vindication for all the stress, legal fees, and sleepless nights I'd endured. As the party wound down, I found myself alone on my boat's deck, looking out at the peaceful water and thinking about this incredible journey. 9 months ago, I'd been a quiet marine engineer living peacefully with my memorial boat, and Karen had been the unchallenged queen of Bayside Cove. Tonight, she was sleeping in a prison cell while I was surrounded by friends who'd learned the importance of standing together against injustice. Walter was the last to leave, lingering to share final wisdom. You know, Nate, he said, looking up at my restored boat, Karen thought she could break you by attacking something you loved. Instead, she gave you strength to expose her crimes and save our community. Sometimes the thing meant to destroy us becomes what makes us stronger. I watched Walter walk home and realized he was absolutely right about the profound irony of our situation. That night, I sat in my boat's pilot house, running my fingers over the gleaming controls and thinking about Tommy and Marcus. They died fighting enemies who used violence and intimidation, and I'd won my battle against someone who used lawsuits and harassment for similar ends. Different weapons, same basic evil. The desire to control and destroy others for personal gain. My boat had become more than a memorial. It had become a symbol of resistance against bullies and a reminder that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to surrender their principles. You don't abandon ship, you defend it. This boat was my battleground now, and I'd won the war. Comment below and let me know about any HOA horror stories you've experienced, because something tells me Karen's story isn't the only one out there. And who knows, maybe your drama could be the next incredible story I get to share with the world.